Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Fantastic. I'm Erkan. That's great. I think I'll give it a minute or so to allow everyone to sign up to the webinar. So if anyone that's signed up has any questions or anything they'd like me to discuss at this point, then let me know. All right, then, let's make a start. So if you'll remember, last week we got this far. So we created our main activity file, which had a function or method called click button, which was activated when the button was clicked, and that logs the phrase button clicked along with the tag click button to the logs, and it also gets the value of the edit text field, which is this field here. Currently the value is Rob. It converts it into a string, and then it logs that as well, and then it makes a toast, which is a little black pop-up from the bottom of the screen which says hi, and then whatever the name is that we've put into the text field or the edit text. So we can just try that out now. So if I put Robert in there and then click the button, you can see it says hi, Robert. As a reminder, the layout was created on activitymain.xml, and we did that mostly by dragging and dropping, but we did note that if we click text, then we can see the XML that creates that and customize it if we want to. Okay, so any questions from last week quickly before we begin what we're going to do today? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Shakita. Shakita Goodwin, getting a white screen. I'm not too sure what to do about that, I'm afraid. Is anyone else having that problem, or can everyone else see the screen okay? Yes, thank you, Nelson. Does that mean you're having a problem, or that you can see the screen okay? So Nelson can't see the screen either. Okay. Let's have a look. How's that? Is that better? Wonderful. Sorry, guys. Thanks very much. Okay. So as a very quick recap, if you didn't see that, we have our code in main activity, which takes the button value and eventually converts it to a toast, which is a little black pop-up which appears at the bottom of the screen for a short period of time. So this is what we created last week, and the layout we created with activity main, mostly using drag and drop. So once again, has anyone got any questions before we get on with this week's? Yep, brilliant. Okay, glad you're all up and running. So this week we're going to complete the app that I introduced at the beginning of last week, which was our currency converter. So we're going to start once again from scratch, because these small bits that you have to do every time are really important in the early days of creating Android apps. You want to just get them second nature. So I'll call it currency converter. Everything else we'll leave as the defaults. And again, we talked about the SDK last week. I'll leave that as the default. And then, as before, I'll go for either the blank activity or the empty activity. We don't need the menu up the top there, so I'll go for empty. And then, again, we can leave that as the default as well. And then while that's being created, we'll jump over to Google Images and find an image that has something to do with money for our currency converter. Oh, there we go. That first one looked pretty good. So let's go for that. So I'm just going to control click or right click and save image as, and then I'll just pop it on the desktop. And then we'll insert that later on. Okay, we're almost there. So we're going to start by creating the layout, and then we'll create the code, which will be similar to what we had before, but we'll do a little bit of working with variables, which we didn't look at last time. We're going to have to convert from one variable type to another and multiply by the conversion value to convert it from pounds to dollars. Okay, here we go. So here's our activity main.xml. Everything's just coming in. We've got our hello world there. And let's bring in our project. There we go. Right. So I'm going to get rid of hello world. So just press delete to get rid of that. That's fine. We can delete that. And then I'm going to bring in my own text view. So we'll have just a large text, which is going to be centered at the top. And this will just be the title of the app, which is a little unnecessary, really, given that it's at the top of the screen. But it reminds us how to create a text view and then customize it. So remember, we can change a lot of things about our app here. So I'm going to go for text color. Click on the dots, and then this text is going to be red. There we go. And I want to change text size as well. So let's make it 20 SP. That's a little too small. 40 SP, a little too big. So 30, probably just in the middle. Great. And remember, you can select from the default text sizes if you want to do that, or you can just type in a standard text size. Okay, now we're going to have our image. So we're going to get it in the Finder or Windows Explorer if you're on Windows, and I'm going to drag it into the Res drawable folder. I'm going to do that by control clicking on the folder and reveal in Finder. And there it is. So I'm going to double click on there and then get my other Finder window and just drag it in. There we go. If you're on Windows, by the way, you can actually just drag it straight into the drawable folder on Android Studio, but sadly it doesn't work when you try and do that on a Mac. But there we go. There's our image. I've done quite a lot there, so I'll just check to see if we've got any questions. Can we sometime go over how to open a completely new screen? Click a button and yes. I'll tell you what, I'll try and do that after we've created our currency converter. So we'll create a second app which has two screens. Thank you, Ivan. Good question. Okay, then we're going to bring in our image view, which is just going to go underneath currency converter. And we're going to scroll down to SRC. Click the three dots and then look under project, and if we scroll down past all of this, inside drawable should be money. There we go. So now we've got our lovely big money image, but I want to resize that so it doesn't take up the whole screen. Let's set the width this way. So instead of setting the width to wrap content, we'll set it to a fixed width. So let's try 300 pixels. Hasn't changed anything. Nope, doesn't like that at all. Let's see if we can choose the options. We don't really want it to do any one of those. Let's just change the height. Yeah, it's not letting me do that. Okay, maybe we'll treat that as a background image for our app. I'll come back to you if I figure out how to change the size there. It's not letting me do that. Interesting. Okay. Well, more importantly is our edit text. So let's bring in our plain text field, which I'm going to put right in the center of the app if I can. And I'll stretch it to full width. I can actually select that here to fill parent on the width. There we go. And then we'll have our button. Which I'll have centered and underneath the text. And we'll call this convert. And you'll remember that we need to set the onClick method of our button to decide what method is going to be called when that button is clicked. So I'll just call that convert. Okay. The only other thing we'll need is the ID of our edit text. And I'll just use the default, which is edit text. All right, so now we've got our setup. It's time to write some Java code. So let's open up nothing's going right for me today. Where's my Java code's not there. Let's just bring that back in. I think there may be an issue with this particular app. Anyone spot my Java file? Should be inside Java and then currency converter, but there's nothing in there. Let's have a look in Finder. No, definitely empty. Java, yeah, that's where it should be. Okay, this is very frustrating. I think what I might do is switch over to my first Android app, which we created last week, which does have its main activity file in the right place. There's definitely nothing in this one. Sorry about that. There seems to be an issue with the setup of this particular app. I'm going to move on to this one instead. So let's just change the text to currency converter. And we'll change the text on the button to convert. And we'll give it an ID of convert as well. Update the usages. And then let's remind ourselves what the ID of the text field was. It was my text field. Okay, sorry about that. Now we can go back over to main activity. And let's get rid of the code that we had before. And I'll just select the button and change the on-click to convert. There we go. Okay, any questions about that? Nope. Great. Okay, apologies for the confusion in that bit. So we just need to create a method again, which we do using public to create a method which can be accessed from anywhere within the app, and then void because this is not going to return anything. And then we're going to call it convert. And remember, it's going to be called by the button, which is a view. So we define a variable of type view with a capital V, and we'll call it view with a little v. Even though we never refer to that variable, we still need to have it there. Okay, then we need to get the value that the user has put in the edit text. So we'll create an edit text variable with a name of edit text, and we need to cast it as an edit text because it will be returned as a view, because we're going to be using find view by ID, and we want r.id.myTextField. So that will then get the text field for us. Next, we need to get the value as a string. So we'll create a string, which I'll call text field value. And this is going to be the edit text dot get text dot to string. Now this is the clever bit. So we're going to need to multiply this value by a certain amount to get it from, say, pounds to dollars. And I'll call that amount 0.65. But if we try and do it like this, so text field value is equal to text field value times 0.65, for example, that might be a way to do it. That's not going to work because text field value is a string. It doesn't give us a particularly friendly error message there, but we can't multiply strings by numbers. So we're going to need to convert the string into a number. And the type of number that we'll use is a double, which is essentially a decimal number. And then I'll call this dollar amount. So this is going to be the amount in dollars. And what we're going to do is take the text field value, which remember is a string, and we're going to convert it into a double. And we do that using double dot parse double. Like that. So that's going to convert the string into a number that we can then deal with. Then we need to convert that into pounds, sorry. So let's create pound amount, which is going to be the dollar amount multiplied by whatever the conversion is, say 0.65. And then we need to convert that back to a string so that we can report it to the user in a toast. So I'll call it pound amount string. And this is going to be pound amount dot to string. So Java is a strongly typed language. You have to convert your variables to the correct type to be able to do certain things with them, in this case, calculations. And then finally, we do our toast. So we do toast.makeText, and then we use the application context because we're going to do this in the context of an application. And the text that we're going to use is a pound symbol plus the value. So pound amount string. And then we're going to use toast.length long to say we want it to be a long toast rather than a short one, even though they're both quite short. And finally, we want to show the toast. So that's it. With any luck, this will get the value that we need, convert it into a double, convert that from a dollar to pound amount by multiplying by 0.65, convert that back to a string, and then display that as a toast to the user. So any questions while that's compiling, and then we'll take a look. Nope. Excellent. All clear so far? Great. So let's go over and find my emulator. Ah, there it is. Okay. Let's give it a shot. So if I've got £30, for example, then I press convert and it converts to £19.50. Fantastic. £50, convert, £32.50, etc. Excellent. So we've made a basic app that is reasonably useful as long as we get the conversion rate right and we're able to take a value from the user that they've entered and convert it, multiply it by something, convert it back to a string, and then display it to the user. So my plan was to create a higher or lower app. So the user has to guess a number that the app produces randomly, and they're told whether it's higher or lower. So unless there's anything else that people would like us to do, I'll do that. But let's first see if we can set up things as Ivan has requested. So I think there is a lesson in my course on precisely that. So the quickest way for me to show you would be to grab the course files. So I hope you've all managed to have a go at the course, and any feedback or comments at this point would be great. So we've got text field, images, all the stuff that we've seen so far. Then we look at Java in more detail. And then we look at things like animations, games, videos, layouts, etc. Then we do list views, timers. We make an egg timer app, a brain trainer app. At some point here, we definitely add a new activity. Adding a new activity. There we go. So I'm going to click on lecture 103, adding a new activity to get the Android Studio files, and then download. So you can get those yourself from androiddevcourse.com/coursecontent/6.7.zip. And then we'll open that up. And then we'll open it in Android Studio. So on the desktop, multiple activities, there we go. Choose. We'll just see if anyone else has got anything they'd like to do. Nope. Okay. In that case, once we've looked at multiple activities, we'll proceed with the higher or lower app. While we're waiting for that to create, I'll get ourselves set up using my first Android app for our higher or lower app. Just by starting afresh. There we go. Are we there yet? Here we go. So you can see here we've got two Java files, so a main activity and a second activity. You can add a new activity by control clicking or right clicking and then new and then Java class. And that will then allow you to create a new activity. So just like we have here, and then we just name that second activity. And then let's run the app. It might take a little while, but so I'll show you what's going on here. We're initially creating a list view, which is essentially a table, which we've already created in activity main. There we go. So there's our list view. And then we're creating an array list of strings, which is essentially an array of strings, which is called friends and is a new array list. And then we're adding values to that list. So Monica, Chandler, Joey, and Rachel. So at this point, we've got an array which contains 4 names. Then we create what's known as an array adapter, which essentially links our array to our list view. So once we've created that, then we can take the list view and set the array adapter to it. And that enables us to essentially display those 4 names in the list view. And then we set an on-item click listener on the list view. So this essentially listens for somebody tapping on the list view or one of the items on the list view. And then this is the bit that Ivan will be interested in. So we create an intent, which is a way that we go from one Java class to another, or one activity or screen to another. And this is a new intent within the application context. So we're staying within our app here, but we want to jump to second activity.class, which is this bit here. And in this particular app, we're even being more clever than that, and we're putting an extra value into our intent, which is the name of the position that's been tapped. And then that is then passed to the new activity. And we start that new activity using the instruction start activity and then our intent. Then if we jump over to second activity, we're creating a new, that's our go back button. So this just goes back to the original activity. So it's a new intent that goes back to main activity, and then we'd start that activity. But this is the interesting bit. We create we link to a text view which exists in activity second.xml. Then we get the intent, and then we get that variable that we sent earlier from the list view, which tells us the name that the user tapped on, and we say hello and that person there. So we're doing quite a lot of stuff there. We're creating a list view, and then when someone taps on the list view, we're creating an intent which jumps over to the second activity and passes a bit of information to that activity, which is then received by the second activity and displayed on the screen. So let's just see that in action. Here we go. So let's click on Chandler, and then you can see it jumps to the second activity and it knows what was clicked on. Then we can go back to the first activity, click Monica, and it knows that Monica was clicked on. So that's how you create multiple activities. Obviously, more detail on the course itself in that video if you want to watch that. Any questions, Ivan or anyone else? Why are you using find view by ID rather than referring directly to the objects? Could you clarify that question, Mike? Find view by ID is the way that we get that particular object, and then we set its value or get a value from it or do something with it. So that is the way that we are getting the object. There is no other way to refer more directly to the object. I'll come back and check in a moment to see if I've misunderstood that question, but please do ask again if that hasn't answered it for you. Find view by ID just gets the view itself, converts it to a text view, and then we can do whatever we liked with it after that. Okay, so that's our multiple activities. Unless there's anything else that people would like to do, I'm going to get rid of that and go back to my first Android app, and then we'll create our higher or lower app. So what we're looking to do here is essentially create an app where the phone chooses a random number, and then the user has to guess that number, and the phone tells them whether they're higher or lower. And the idea is to get it in as few numbers of guesses as possible. So let's create the necessary layout, and then the interesting bit is, of course, the code. So we'll have a basic plain text at the top there. And for the text, I'll say guess a number let's say between 0 and 10. Oh, and I've used a text field instead of a plain text view. I should tell you all, I've got a bit of a cold today, so I'm not quite at the top of my game. I apologize in advance for that. Right, so I wanted a text view, not an edit text. Guess a number between 0 and 10. There we go. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Okay, then we bring in our edit text. Let's make it full width. There we go. And then we'll have our button. Which will say guess. And we'll give it an ID of guess. And an on click of guess as well. Okay, the only thing we need to remember is the ID of our edit text. And edit text sounds fine to me. Okay, so now back over to main activity. And let's start writing our code. So the first thing we need to do is generate our random number. Now, we don't want that to change every time the user guesses, otherwise they could be there for a very long time. So I'm going to create the random number right here in the class itself, and that means it'll be created as soon as the app loads, and it will be accessible from any of the methods that we use down here. So if, for example, I created it here, which I might do by calling it int random number, so that would create an integer called random number. Then if I had, as I'm going to have, a method for when my button is clicked, I won't be able to access the random number integer from that method because it's only accessible from the class or method that it's created in. So if I create it up here instead, then it's what's known as a global variable, and it will be accessible from anywhere. So it'll be accessible from onCreate or from the method that we're going to create, which will happen when the user takes a guess. So then let's create our random number. And we'll do this in onCreate, because if we try and do it in the main activity, that won't work because we can't actually run code in the main activity. We can only create variables. If we want to actually do something like set the random number to a random value, then we need to do that in the onCreate method down here. So to create a random number in Java, we use random to create a random number generator. And I'm going to call that random. Notice the standard naming there. You don't have to use this, but if you're creating a variable of type random with a capital R, the convention is to call it random with a small r, unless you want to call it something more specific, of course. And this is going to be a new random number generator. So notice this isn't a random number in itself. This is a random number generator, which we can use again and again if we want to. And the way that we use it is we take our random number and we set it equal to random dot next int. So if you think of this random number as generating a random number, then each random number that it generates is considered the next int. So I think I said, let's guess our number between, what was it, 0 and 10. So to guess a random number between 0 and 10, we use next int and then, bizarrely enough, 11. So you would have thought maybe 10 was the obvious choice there, but we actually use 11 because we're starting at 0. So if we go from 0 all the way to 10 inclusive, that's 11 different numbers that this thing could be. So we actually use nextInt 11 to create a random number from 0 to 10. All right. So now we've created our random number. Next, we need to create a method for when the user clicks the button. I've already forgot what that method was called, so I'm just going to go back and check. So onClick guess, very sensible. So as usual, public void guess, and then this is going to be called by the button, which is a view. Hopefully this is almost second nature now. And then the first thing that we want to do is check the value that they've entered. So we'll create our edit text again. And that reminds me, let me go and see if, was it Mike's question? So you can't refer directly to text view. Is it because text view 2 is defined in the XML, so the Java code can't refer to it? Yeah, that's essentially it. But we are referring to it, is what I'd like to argue. That it's not that we can't do it, it's that's exactly what we're doing when we use find view by ID. So we're finding the view and then linking that to a variable in the Java, which allows us to refer to it directly. So I guess it is kind of one step removed from referring to it directly, but that's how it works. We use find view by ID to get a variable, which we then use to link to the text view or any other view that appears in the activity main.xml. Yeah, thanks, Mike, for the clarification. So then we'll call it guest number. And just to be clear, I'll call it guest number edit text. And as usual, we'll use find view by ID. And it's r.id.myTextField. And then we'll convert that to a string. Oh, let's not forget to cast that as an edit text, because find view by ID returns a view, and we've defined this as an edit text, so we have to convert it from one to the other. Then we're going to need to get the value, which is going to be initially a string. So we'll call it guest number string. And this is going to be guest number edit text dot get text. dot toString. Then we're going to convert that to an integer. So int, and I'll call it guessed number int, which is going to be an integer dot parse int, and then we take our guessed number string. So just like we used the double dot parse double last time, we're using integer dot parse int this time to convert it from a string to an integer or a whole number. Okay, now this time we need to check whether their guess is higher or lower than the true value. So we do that with an if statement. So we haven't seen these before, but if you've used them in other programming languages, they work in exactly the same way here. So we use if, and then in parentheses, we put our clause, which is either true or false. So perhaps we might have if guessed number int is greater than the random number, then we want to tell them that they're wrong, specifically that they're too high. So let's create a toast to do that. Make text, get application context, and we want to say too high. And we'll use toast.lengthLong and show. Okay, the other option, or one of the other options, we're going to access using else. So if it's not too big, then we're going to check if it's too small. So guessed number int is less than random number. Then we're going to make a toast again, so I'll just copy that down there, but this time we want to say too low. And the only other option is that they've got it right. So let's say you got it. And then that's essentially it. Let's have a look and see if that does the job. So the logic there, again, we've taken their value that they've entered, converted it to a string, converted that to an integer, and then checked whether that's bigger, smaller, or equal to, even though we haven't done the check that it's equal to, but it must be. Oh, we've got an issue there. Field, it did predict that for me, so I'm surprised that it's not there, but perhaps the ID is something else. Oh, there, it's just edit text. Usually it only predicts IDs for you if they're actually there. But I guess it probably was there at one point before I deleted it. So let's run that again. Any questions that have appeared there? Thanks, Mike. How does it know to create a random number between 0 and 10? That's what this 11 is doing. So when it creates a random number, it's always a random number between 0 and something, and that something is always one less than the number that you enter here. So if you wanted a random number between 0 and 30, you would put 31 there. So it's slightly odd that you put 31 rather than 30, but that's because there are 31 random integers between 0 and 30 inclusive, and that's what this 31 is referring to there. Does that make sense? Hope that answers your question, Ivan. Let's go and have a look and see if our emulator is working. Okay, right, looking good. So let's start with a guess of 4. That's too low. Okay, guess of 6. Also too low. Okay, guess of 8 is too high. Okay, I think I've got it. So guess of 7. Got it. Fantastic. Okay, so our app works, but there's a couple of issues with it at the moment. Firstly, we've got 3 lines here, which are all very, very similar, which is generally a bad thing. Anyone like to suggest a reason why that might be a bad thing? I'll give you a moment to type. Anyone got it? No? Okay, could be because it's taking too long to type. But the reason is, if we want to suddenly decide that instead of showing the too high or too low message as a toast, we want to display it on the screen, for example, then in order to update that, we're going to have to update 3 lines manually. Now, in this app, that's not particularly hard work, but if you imagine an app when there are loads and loads of different options here, and this is repeated maybe 100 times, then that would be really difficult to maintain. It also is just inefficient. We've got a lot more code than we need here. So generally, when you've got large chunks of your app that are either the same or very similar, then alarm bells should start to go off. And a way to solve that in this case would be to have something like a message. So we could create a string called message, which was initially just an empty string. And then here, instead of actually creating the toast, we just update message to too high. Similarly down here, we're going to update message to too low. Let's not forget the exclamation mark. And then here, we'll update message to you got it. And then once we've finished that, we'll create the toast using the message string. So this is much neater than what we had before. There's less code and it's a lot more updatable. So I only need to update 1 line if I want to suddenly display the message in another way. But of course it will work in exactly the same way. So that's very much something to remember regardless of what system you're developing on, what programming language you're using. If you have large chunks of code which are more or less the same, then you probably are going wrong somewhere and there's probably a more efficient way to do it. All right, the last thing that I think we need to fix here is that the game is fantastic. It's obviously very addictive, but it's frustrating to the user because once they get it right, then they're done. They can't actually play the game again unless they shut down the app and open it up again, and that creates a new random number, which obviously isn't a very good user experience. So let's make it so that the random number is regenerated when the user gets it right. And that's actually pretty easy to do. We're going to do it here because this is where they would get it right. And all we need to do is just essentially copy those lines. Oh, let's get it back to 11 so it's not too difficult to guess. So we use random number and the random number generator as well. So that would work as it is, although we should probably tell the user guess again or something like that to make it clear that there's a new game ready for them. But of course, we've got these 2 lines of code twice in our app, which we want to avoid. So I'll show you another way to get around having chunks of code twice in your apps. And that is to create a method which does the job that you're doing. So we create a method in just the same way that we did before. So this is going to be a new method, which I'll call new random. It doesn't need any variables to be passed to it, and it's not going to return any variables either. That's what the void implies. And then all this needs to do is create a new random number generator and then set random number equal to it. And because random number is a global variable, it's accessible in this method, and this method. So we don't need to worry about whether it's going to be available to those methods. So now, instead of using those lines of code, we just use new random. And similarly here, new random. There we go. Let's have a look. So creating methods like that is our most common way of reducing repeated code. We can just call that method every time we want to do that thing, rather than manually write out the code for it each time. Okay, I will run this in a minute, but we've got just under 10 minutes left. So is there anything in particular people would like to cover in the last part? Thank you, Shkita. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right there, because you can condense it. Exactly. Yep, we got the answer, but it is a little slow to type. So let's see if this works in the way that we hoped. So I'll try and guess it as quickly as possible. 5 is too low. 7 is too high. There we go. Right, so now we can have 6. You got it. Guess again. So let's guess 6. 6 is too high. 3 is too high. 2 is too high. 1 is too high, so it must be 0. We got it. Guess again. So now you can go round and round, and it's a much more fun game than it was when you could only play it once. Okay, so we've got a question from Mike. To download from a real phone and to post it for download. So generate an APK. Yes. I'm not sure if that's something we're going to be able to do in the last few minutes. I don't actually cover that in my course. Let's see. If we can find a guide, and then we can at least start doing that, and then you can carry on doing that when we've finished the webinar. So the file that you use to download to your phone is an APK file. So let's see if we can do that. So build and make project should do the job for us. So build up here and make project. While that's happening, let's have a look. So let's have a look at all of those options. It should be building that at the moment. Has it finished? It's hard to tell. So build and make project, and then let's have a look at the build menu options. Here we go, build APK. In the course, I show you how to upload your file to the Google Play Store. And actually, that's done it. Super easy. So that was a debug release. So you can take this and then put it onto your phone. Let me just do a quick Google to get instructions for side loading, as it's known. Onto an Android phone. So I believe you need to, here we go, allow in the security settings, allow the installation of apps from unknown sources. And you might want to disable verify apps just in case your app does something, because it's in debug mode, that Google considers to be potentially causing harm. And then to get the APK file itself, you could just upload it to anywhere really, so Dropbox or a web server, and then use the browser to access the APK file. And then as long as you've selected allow the installation of apps from unknown sources, then that will run the APK file and get it working on your phone. Let's just have a quick look at the options. So a signed APK is what you would use to actually put it onto the App Store, or the Google Play, sorry. But that's a slightly longer process than we've got time for right now, because you have to generate keys. But if you do want to do that, it is covered in the course. I'll just jump back. It's the last or second to last video in the course, which shows you how to upload to Google Play. All right, we've just got a couple of minutes left, so any more questions before I leave you? So there we go. It's a reasonably long process, but it is completed step by step in that lecture, so that's the best way to go. Okay, thanks, Mike. Would you recommend using mobile app development platforms such as Appcelerator? Yes and no. I've never actually used Appcelerator itself. I've used Cordova and PhoneGap Build, and I've had some success with them. As long as your app is pretty simple, then they can work really well. But the problem comes in whenever you want to do anything that's particularly specific to the phone. So if you just wanted to have a simple login system where the user opens up your app, logs in, and then sees some information, then yes, Appcelerator and PhoneGap Build and these other development platforms are a great idea, and they work really well. And the advantage of those, if anyone hasn't seen them before, is that you can then develop once and produce a cross-platform app, whereas all the methods that we've seen so far are specific to iOS and or Android. So you can't create an app in Android Studio and put it on the iOS App Store, and vice versa. Whereas apps that you create with Appcelerator or PhoneGap Build, you can cross-deploy. So I'd say for simple apps, yep, those can be great, but whenever you start doing anything complicated, it tends to become either quite hacky and potentially buggy, or just really slow and not a great user experience. So that's my kind of 2 pence on it. Simple apps, great. Complex apps, go native. Thanks, Carrie. In Pass and AppDelegate, does it matter if the host name is HTTP or HTTPS? I'd need to know a bit more specific what you're trying to do there. You're trying to connect to your Pass app, is that right? If that's the case, it's almost certainly HTTPS. It does matter. The best thing to do would be to view the URL in a browser and see what you see at each one. You'll probably get errors each way, but one of them will probably give you an error that you shouldn't be looking at this in a browser, and the other one will give you a 404, or an error that's saying that this URL doesn't exist. So yes, it does matter, and you should use whichever one works, but I'd need a bit more information on what you're doing to be clear what you need there. Solves the issue. Fantastic. All right then, well that takes us to 6 o'clock my time. So unless there are any very final questions, I will bid you adieu and thank you for your company. I've had a great time, and please do make the most of my course, and obviously post in the forums. And if you need anything from me after this webinar, then just drop me an email or tweet me and I will get back to you. Thanks very much and goodbye.